Continue on with Chapter 9 of the FDA Final Rule, Subpart B, and I'll speak to 29014. FDA balanced three important public health considerations: concern about the extended availability of newly deemed new tobacco products without scientific review, concern about flavored products' youth appeal, and preliminary data that some individuals may potentially use such products to transition away from combusted tobacco use. So it says they balanced, apparently, which they didn't, but it says they balanced three important public health considerations. And the first one was the extended availability without scientific review. So they really haven't had any substantial scientific data regarding saying that vaping products is more harmful than combusted analog cigarettes. In fact, throughout the entire FDA final rule, like I even stated in Subpart A, it says in 28992, ENDS would have great difficulty showing that a product is substantially equivalent to a combusted cigarette. No, that's not the one. Wait, that's not it. Wait, so somewhere I said that in there. Wait. Okay, here it is. It's 28998. If ENDS promote transition from combustible tobacco use among current users, there could be a public health benefit. Now it says it's could, but there have been studies that have been done that actually does say, like the Oxford College says vaping products are 95% more healthier than combusted tobacco. And there have been other studies like that too done. So apparently FDA fails on that point. Then it says concern about flavored products' youth appeal. You know, adults like flavored products too. I enjoy multiple flavors. I mean, I've done over 100 e-liquids as reviews on the Jacob Clare YouTube channel, because I like different types of blends. In fact, every human being on earth, even a infant, even a newborn infant that hasn't even made really any choices, enjoys certain tastes as opposed to others. I mean, if they taste something sour, they're most likely going to go, oh, what's that? If they taste something sweet, they're probably going to like that. That's just the human anatomy, the human biophysiological chemistry in our bodies. So if youth like, it says flavored products youth appeal, that's in everything. I mean, everybody likes ice cream, cookies, white cheddar, popcorn, all that sugar. There's sugars in that white cheddar popcorn. It could be anything. So to say that somehow or another they're concerned about flavored products with the youth appeal is really stretching it a bit. But if they stated something like concerned about flavored nicotine products youth appeal, they could have a point there. But as far as the flavors themselves, completely disagree with, and it's actually unreal, because there's so much other stuff that humans like other than flavored vapor products that are on the market. So they stretch it a bit there. But what they're also saying is that these flavored vaping products will draw the youth in to vape on these products which contain nicotine, but they have yet to prove in substantial scientific data, the FDA has yet to prove that nicotine itself is harmful, unless, of course, you abuse nicotine. I mean, if you take a bottle of nicotine and drink it, pure nicotine, you're going to probably die. Or you're definitely going to get extremely upset stomach that's going to burn the lining in your throat, in your stomach, in your lips, in your mouth. I mean, it's everything. I mean, everyone has, Clorox bleach in their house or in their apartment or their living quarters. They have detergents. They have all types of different things that can harm you in everyday use. And that's permitted. That's permitted into American/human living quarters. It does not mean that nicotine is bad for you or harmful to you unless you abuse it. If you went and drank a bottle of bleach, it's probably going to kill you. Well, it's similar to nicotine or anything for that matter. So that's completely stretched out and unfounded. And then the preliminary data that some individuals may potentially use such products to transition away from combusted tobacco use. So, in other words, what it's basically saying is the FDA rather had the youth, or not the youth, but the FDA would rather have some individuals continue to smoke combusted cigarettes rather than vape on vaping products, which are less harmful than combusted cigarettes. I mean, this balanced three important public health considerations is complete fallacy, complete utter fallacy. Actually, that entire part there, 29014, makes absolutely no sense. Then 29019, FDA does not at this time intend to enforce these requirements for components and parts of newly deemed products that are sold that are sold or distributed solely for further manufacturing into finished tobacco products. FDA intends to limit enforcement to finished tobacco products. So what it says in the FDA final rule is after the 36 months are up, on May 11th, 2019, it pretty much will be a case-by-case basis as to how they're going to enforce vape shops or manufacturers, e-liquid manufacturers, hardware, software manufacturers. They will decide which ones to go after. Most likely, and I'm going to read that, I believe, also in the FDA final rule in these notes, the FDA enforcement team, so to speak, will actually pick on the bigger companies rather than the smaller companies to send a message down to the smaller companies or smaller manufacturer companies that, by the way, if we can go after Eton or eLeaf, though I'm pretty sure those companies are going to comply, but I'm going to just use that as an example, something like an Eton company. If we can go after Eton and enforce our measures on them and stop all their imports coming into America, we certainly can go after a little shop and put them out of business as well. But what they're saying is, it says FDA does not at this time intend to enforce these requirements for like components and parts of newly deemed. So like as far as the atomizer or drip tips or RDAs or the light display that comes up here and things of that nature, which are components, batteries and all that, they're not going to enforce it right away. They're going to wait for a while before they do that. That's all that's really saying. 29018 states, some studies have revealed the existence of toxicants in both the e-cigarette liquid and the exhaled aerosol of some e-cigarettes, but that we do not have sufficient data to determine what effects e-cigarettes have on public health at the population level. So they're saying that they believe that there are toxicants in e-liquid and and the exhaled aerosol, but they have no substantial, they have no sufficient data to support that premise. FDA is really, off their rocker, and this is the reason why it's actually these lawsuits have been filed, because there are so many areas in the FDA final rule that contradict other parts within the FDA final rule, let alone or in violation of the FDA executive orders I spoke about in Part 5, in violation of Tobacco Control Act 2009 as in Part 7, and in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act as in Part 4. I mean, it really it's completely erroneous as far as how their framework of this FDA final rule. It's completely really a joke. Unfortunately, it's affecting actual human beings. And or businesses. They don't have sufficient data. They actually say that we do not have sufficient data to determine what effects e-cigarettes have in public health at the population level, meaning on the vast scale of all the states in the United States of America. They don't have sufficient data. They don't have it. And yet they can put an FDA final rule which will affect the vaping community or vaping industry without sufficient data. Because what's going to happen actually, and I spoke about this in the Part 2 FDA contracts, is that you're going to submit all these applications to the FDA, and in turn the FDA will learn what works and what does not, or that is actually in fact, and which is really scary, and this should also be challenged in a court of law, is their long-term intent on what they're going to do with these applications. The FDA will look at the applications and they will excerpt certain parts out of those applications that suit their agenda. And if they find anything, any product that wasn't approved of through the FDA, they're going to use that as this quote-unquote sufficient data in order to regulate the e-cigarette industry even more. They're going to exploit the applications. That's really their long-term goal, just like they exploited the whole public notice thing with the comments and the public workshops and the industry meetings and the medical industry meetings and even the attorneys that met with the FDA during the time of that whole process in 2015, when they were speaking in terms of protecting certain rights and statutes on the books for the vaping community. The FDA completely ignored all that information because they have an agenda. And once again, that can be definitely challenged in a court of law as far as their long-term intent. I mean, I know it's going to happen even before it happens. Because if you understand how the FDA final rule reads, that's exactly what they're after. Those applications will give the FDA this sufficient data to try to prove that e-cigarettes are harmful to your health. So, in a very indirect and very crafty way, the FDA is having the vaping industry actually do all the dirty work, or all the work for the FDA, because the FDA does not have this sufficient data. You heard it here at the Jacob Clare YouTube channel. 29029 and 29029 to 29030. It says, studies show that e-liquid tobacco products contain nicotine, propylene glycol, glycerin, tobacco-specific nitrosamines, that's nitrosamines, SAMINES. Tobacco alkaloids, carbonyls, that's CARBONYLS. Ethylene glycol, diacetyl, acetyl propionyl, that's PROPIONYL. Heavy metals and volatile organic compounds, PENTANEDIONE. Acetoin, I guess, ACETOIN. Aldehydes, ALHEHYDES. And then BENZALDEHYDE. And then CINNAMALDEHYDE. And then formaldehyde, I guess, FORMALDEHYDE. And then CROTONALDEHYDE. And then DIETLE glycol. So what they're saying is they have studies that show that e-liquid tobacco products contain all these types of chemicals within the e-liquid. And yet they just stated that they have no substantial data to determine what effects e-cigarettes have on public health at the population level. They just contradicted themselves once again in the FDA final rule. On 29029 to 29030, they said they have all these chemical studies, and yet in 29018, they have no chemical studies. That's why this needs to go into a court of law and fought out, because it's so erroneous and so contradictory in a lot of areas, a lot of passages in the FDA final rule, that it's a joke, is what it is. It's a big con on the American people once again. And then in 29043, prior to the Sottera case, that's SOTTERA case, FDA did not seek to ban e-cigarettes. Now, I spoke about that very deeply in Part 1, Past and Present Litigation, and I spoke specifically to that Sottera case or the Enjoy case. So if you need to refresh your memory as to what that is, or you haven't seen the video or that part 1, then you need to do so you can understand what I'm talking about here. But what they did was the FDA banned imports of Enjoy products into America, and I believe it was 2008, 2009. And what happened was, and also I talk about it in Part 2, the FDA contracts. And what happened is, during that time period, what the court said is they have to lift the ban on the imports, which they did, the FDA did, but also the court ruled that they can regulate tobacco products or tobacco-related products. So at that time period, around 2010 to 2011, the FDA started to have these public meetings with their stakeholders, which were basically investors. And I talk about that in the Part 2 FDA contracts, about these investors, about they were starting to have a strategy against the e-cigarette industry back in 2010 to 2011, which grew out of this particular Enjoy case. And so they weren't even, prior to that case, like it says in 29043, prior to the Enjoy case, they weren't interested in banning or having e-cigarettes go through a process like PMTA process, SE process, all those other processes that combustible cigarettes had to go through and still have to go through. Even though most of those processes with the combustible cigarettes are mainly substantial equivalence applications, because cigarettes pretty much all look alike. Outside maybe the filter might be tweaked a little bit differently, it's pretty much all substantial equivalence. So it doesn't cost the combustible cigarettes like R.J. Reynolds and those guys, Philip Morris, so much money. But anyway, so prior to that Enjoy case, they weren't really even interested in the e-cigarette industry. But after that case, when the court ruled that the FDA could have the power, or does have the power, to regulate e-cigarettes, that's when, as well, not so much e-cigarettes, but the court said that the FDA has the power to regulate tobacco products, as long as it doesn't fall into the categories as therapeutic/drugs, because that's part of the other aspect of the FDA. Tobacco Control Act of 2009 has absolutely nothing to do with drugs, devices, or medical devices, or for therapeutic purposes. That's also the reason why, as far as the modified risk claims are concerned, that's the reason why you can't say that that having e-liquid is a way of cessation, that is cessation, because you're saying that e-liquid is healthy or more healthier for you than combusted cigarettes, and that would fall under the drug department within the FDA, which falls outside of the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, and that's the reason why it's very difficult to apply the modified risk claims. But that's like really a side note. But the point here is that the court ruled that the FDA has the power to regulate tobacco products or tobacco-related products, and then, of course, like I spoke about in Part 7 with the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, that's when the FDA started to think about e-cigarettes, which grew out of not only the court case with Enjoy, but also out of the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, because it permitted the Health and Human Services Department Secretary to deem pretty much anything that is tobacco related or a tobacco product. And I speak about that, of course, in the Part 7 Tobacco Control Act of 2009, so you can understand that within that framework. But anyway, they weren't really interested in the e-cigarette market until after that court case, and then especially after the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, which gave powers to the HHS Secretary to deem whatever she believes or he believes is a tobacco-related product. So that's what's going on with the 29043 there. And then in 290, I want to say this real quick. I'm probably going to have about maybe 3 or 4, maybe even 5 subparts to this particular Part 9 of the FDA final rule, because there's a lot of information and it's going to take a lot of time to do it. I just don't want to rush into things. I don't want to just state certain numbers within the FDA final rule or certain sections in the FDA final rule and then just go real quick through it and miss points. I don't want to do that. I'm going to take my time. This is a very serious situation. So I'm going to take my time, and therefore these videos will go very long, and so I'm going to put it in subparts. I thought I could do it in 2 subparts, but I probably might have to do 3, 4, maybe even 5 subparts, because I do have a lot of information to share with you. So anyway, in 29031, FDA recognizes that information about the health effects of the constituents in e-liquids and ENDS, that is electronic nicotine delivery systems, aerosols, in both users and non-users is limited, and that this issue should be explored to better understand the impacts of these products on the population health. And that's exactly like I was saying, what they're going to do with these applications, the PMTA, substantial equivalence process, or the pre-market tobacco application process, that is, the PMTA. That's what they're going to do. They're going to take all that information through those applications and all the testing data and everything that's submitted to the FDA. Not only that, but actually they have to submit an actual e-liquid bottle of whatever product it is. They have to actually submit the Kangra Subtank Mini or the Kapoor 60-watt Mini or the Enjoy, not the Enjoy, the Joytech, Enjoy, the Joytech Cuboid 200-watt. And if they do the Velocity RDA, they have to submit the entire product to the FDA. And then the FDA, like it says, should be explored to better understand. And they will explore all these applications and then suit it to their own agenda, which will definitely be quite draconian in nature. And then in 29032, Tobacco Control Act does not require that FDA make a finding that a product is harmful in order to deem it to be subject to Chapter 9 of the FD&C Act, Section 901. Now, the entire point of the FDA final rule is about the promotion of public health. And the whole entire point of the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 that I spoke about in Part 7 was also all about promoting public health. And yet here it says in 29032, Tobacco Control Act does not require that FDA make a finding that a product is harmful in order to deem it to be subject to Chapter 9. In that particular part in Section 901, it doesn't say that in the Tobacco Control Act. But in the rest of the Tobacco Control Act, it does state that the FDA must find if a product is harmful or not, because it's all about promoting public health. And it's plain language that if you're trying to promote public health, you want to know what's harmful and what's not harmful. It's just simple logic, simple reasoning. And so when they say what they say in here, it's only Section 901. Understand? But they don't speak to the rest of the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, which speaks to harmful products or not harmful products. So once again, the FDA picks and chooses what suits their agenda. That's really the key point. Actually, I want to make a note of that for my epilogue. Just 1 second. Suits and agenda. 1 second. All right. So, FDA is so many, for one thing, there's so many contradictions in the FDA final rule. And then they take certain parts out of the Tobacco Control Act 2009 just to make it appear that they're conforming or complying with the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, when really they are not. Then at 29032, e-liquid is not food or intended for ingestion. Therefore, the fact that PG and VG have been designated GRAS, that is generally recognized as safe for food, does not necessarily mean that these components are safe for inhalation. So what they're saying is, someone wrote in a comment in the FDA final rule that why can't e-liquids be also considered generally recognized as safe? The FDA does that with food. They put down GRAS in capital letters, meaning that it's generally recognized as safe. Of course, probably most of the food that's sold in supermarkets are not safe. They're not even generally safe. We got obesity, heart disease, you've got diabetes, you got you can even have a heart attack out of that heart disease. There's a lot of problems. You get acne, You get oily skin and everything because of all the sugars and flours and salts and all this other crap. So I don't particularly consider that generally recognized as safe. And there was I saw a whole thing on Netflix about the food wars back in the 70s, back in the 60s and the 70s. And finally the FDA finally said it's okay that sugar is generally recognized as safe because it was all politics. The guy that was, well, I don't want to get into all that, but anyway, the FDA wound up saying that sugar is okay for you, that it won't create diabetes and obesity and all this other stuff. They were saying that in the early 70s, and now in the 2000s, even in the 1990s, these kids are having. Even as a 10-year-old kid is obese, they got diabetes, all the statistics are much higher now. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But anyway, the point is they're saying that because e-liquid is not ingested, we don't drink it down, we inhale it, therefore they can't apply the generally recognized as safe standard. That's all they're saying there. But it's okay to have obesity and diabetes and all this other stuff, right? Yeah. All right. 29033. The agency does not have sufficient data to be able to conclude that consumers are inhaling only nicotine and no other chemicals or toxicants when using ENDS, or that is electronic nicotine delivery systems, which is something like this, or something like this, or something like this. Now, the thing is that just contradicted all those chemicals that was in 29029, which states, studies show that e-liquid tobacco products contain nicotine and PG and glycerin and all these chemicals that I read off just a moment ago, which contradicts this particular statement here, which says that it does not have sufficient data to conclude that consumers are inhaling only nicotine and no other chemicals or toxicants when using ENDS. That's an extremely clear contradiction within the FDA final rule. And that's when I was speaking to, in the teaser, when I put the video up in the teaser, I said that I will find the weaknesses within the FDA final rule. Well, there's plenty contradictions in the FDA final rule, let alone that the FDA final rule is violating the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, the FDA Executive Orders, Administrative Procedures Act. It's violating all this stuff. And apparently it's still law and has the enforcement of law as well through those enabling powers. And I'll speak to that eventually because that's actually in the FDA final rule. Then in 29034, if FDA determines that an e-liquid has been contaminated and is therefore adulterated under Section 902, or that it is misbranded under Section 903 of the FD&C Act because its labeling is false or misleading, it can initiate enforcement action such as a seizure, injunction, or criminal prosecution. Understand? So let's say e-liquid manufacturer, without an application approved by the FDA, and let's say definitely in the small e-liquid manufacturers definitely will have their enforcement against them definitely after May 11th, 2019. So let's say on May 11th, 2019, they still have their labels misbranded. Let's say it doesn't have what it's supposed to have, like, and I'll read this eventually in the FDA final rule, that it has to have that nicotine is addictive or something like that. There are certain warning labels, certain warnings have to be on the e-liquid labels, and not only that, the print, and I'll speak to that as well in the FDA final rule. has to be a 12-point font, and I also speak about that in the Part 8 FDA draft guidances as well. But they have to have this print a certain way. It has to be a 12-point font size. And this is definitely not a 12-point font size because I can hardly even read this. But they have to do that eventually. They have to change these labels. And if they are not changed, then what can happen is not only can they seize all these e-liquids, I'm not just picking on this particular e-liquid, it could be any one, but they could seize this e-liquid off the marketplace, place an injunction so the e-liquid manufacturer can no longer put any more e-liquid onto the marketplace, and then even if the FDA so chooses, criminally prosecute them and stick them in prison over an e-liquid label. How do you like them apples? And then it states in there that formaldehyde, that's FORMALDEHYDE, the releasing agents, they state that if you have, well, I don't know, let me see what the volts are in here. Well, this is 4.3, but 1 second, I'll show you a second what they're talking about. On this one, I don't even use it anymore. I never use it. It's all empty and clean and everything. But this was my very first Ego battery. This tank is different because I had a plastic clearomizer at one time attached to this. This was my very first battery back in April of 2011. But this is a 3.3 volts. And according to the FDA final rule, formaldehyde is not created from a 3.3 volt. In other words, it's safe. But on the other hand, 1 second, I'll show you another product. On the other hand, like this Tesla Invader 3, you can actually, there's a dial here, right here for the volts. I don't know if you can see that, but you can actually bring that all the way up to, I believe it's 6.6 volts or 6 volts. And according to the FDA, anything 5 plus volts is considered unsafe because that kind of heat creates the formaldehyde. So formaldehyde is safe at 3.3 volts up until 4.9 volts. But when you get to 5.0 volts and above, that's when formaldehyde, the releasing agents or the compounds are released, and therefore they consider that unsafe because that's when that formaldehyde happens. So when your volts are very high, there's a good likely chance, there's a very good probability that formaldehyde, that is when that is created. Now 29034 says, does not bar sales to individuals generally. So that is, and it's interesting how they use generally, because there will be exceptions to what that really means. When it says generally, there can be exceptions dictated by the FDA, and they will, it's at their own discretion, of course. But it says does not bar sales to individuals. What that means is in the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 in Part 7, you got to listen to that if you want to understand it, unless you have already, that they can't ban e-cigarette products from the market. They're going to limit the e-cigarette market through application processes that will be denied by the FDA. That's the way around it in order for them to ban it. They can't ban it under the Tobacco Control Act of 2009. They're not permitted to do that. But they certainly can limit the market. It's a very crafty, sneaky way of going around that particular statute out of the Act of Congress of the Tobacco Control Act of 2009. And it's very crafty, is what they're doing, okay? But so it says does not bar sales to individuals. But hopefully the Cole-Bishop Amendment will go through, so all products before August 8th, 2016 can remain on the market. And that definitely will make sure that no sales are banned. Anyway, 29035, workshops will help to inform FDA's development of future rules and policies that have an impact on ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems. And that goes to exactly what I was talking to before, and that is what they're really after with these applications. PMTA application, pre-market substantial equivalence applications, substantial equivalence reports, applications, registration, applications, certification, applications. What they're really after with all this information is so it can develop more rules and more regulations. They will exploit all that data to suit their own agenda. And they say it themselves right there in 29035. 29035. FDA agrees that use of ENDS is likely less hazardous for an individual user than continued smoking of traditional cigarettes. Now, that contradicts the other passages I was just reading. It says it and that's a very clear line. There's not much, wiggle room around that. It's not gray. It's a very simple line. FDA agrees that use of ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems, which is this, or anything for that matter, closed or open systems, is likely less hazardous for an individual user than continued smoking of traditional cigarettes. Well, I can definitely agree to that. That's probably the only line that I actually agree with as far as the FDA final rule. And in fact, I'm sure anyone that listens to this video or reads that line can also say, yeah, well, I actually agree with that. That actually makes sense. 29036. No ENDS have been approved by FDA as effective cessation aids. That's CESSATION. Product for therapeutic purposes. The company must submit an application for their ENDS to be marketed as a medical product. And that's what I was just talking about. If they do it for therapeutic purposes, then it becomes a drug, which is a whole different ballgame. But, the sad part about this whole thing is that the pharmaceutical/drug or medical devices, the model that they use in order to get their own applications to get like prescription pills, or it could be liquids or gases or different compounds, whatever. When they submit their applications, when the hospital, probably it's labs that mainly do it. Labs, pharmaceutical companies, probably it's the pharmaceutical companies, because they actually manufacture their own drugs. Because I'm sure it's all relative here. So it's the manufacturer of the finished product. They submit those applications to the FDA, and they're able to regulate those drugs. Now, and not only just prescription drugs, they also can regulate the dietary supplements as well. That is non-prescription medicines or pills, just like Tylenol, Bayer, aspirin, cough medicine. All that stuff is regulated by the FDA. Now, that model that they use within the pharmaceutical industry is very, very complex and very, very costly. Very costly. And it's the exact, as Michael Siegel stated that in one of the videos that I put up with him, the pharmaceutical model is actually used for the e-cigarette industry. Yeah, It's crazy, but it's true. And as time goes by, when I read this stuff to you, it's going to make a lot of sense. So if you're trying to get, like it says, no ends have been approved by FDA as effective cessation. That cessation, AIDS. Now, what that means is no electronic nicotine delivery systems that have been submitted to the FDA, which I don't know any that have been submitted, but I'm sure there have been, but they have been all denied if they have been submitted to the FDA. According to this, no ends have been approved by FDA for therapeutic uses. So in other words, you can't say that this e-liquid is healthier for you. It will make, it's less risky to vape on, that when you vape on the Q-Boy 200 watt upgraded to 200 watts, that it's more safer for you when you use the RDA and get the vapor that way, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the cessation aids, because in order to do that, you have to go through the pharmaceutical model. But the irony of it all is, the sad irony, is the e-cigarette model is actually no different than the pharmaceutical model. It's the same thing, but it's classified differently with the FDA. So if you're saying that this e-liquid is good for your health, or will help you not smoke combusted cigarettes as much, or cigars, or smokeless tobacco, or roll your own tobacco, or cigarillos, or whatever have you, and you say it's much safer and healthier for you than those products I just named, then you'd have to go through the drug aspect, or the drug department, or this, you have to go through the drug department of the FDA. And that's a whole other different process, which is really similar to the entire e-cigarette industry, but they just separate the two. Because the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 speaks to e-cigarettes, the deeming clauses in there, which eventually did speak to the e-cigarette industry, but it's about tobacco and tobacco-related products. That's what governs the tobacco-related products, is the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, and not the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Of course, the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 is really a subpart to that. It's really like an addendum to that Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, because it permits the FDA to regulate tobacco products or tobacco-related products. So you can't. They won't approve it. Like, for instance, in other words, if you submit this e-liquid through a PMTA process that's for e-liquid, or for tobacco-related products, or tobacco-related products, I should say, the FDA will deny it automatically because it's in its wrong category. If you're going to submit it as a drug, so to speak, as a healthy alternative to combusted cigarettes, they will deny it and probably send you a letter stating that this application does not apply to Tobacco Control Act of 2009. What you're asking for is for us to rule on this application, or approve this application, which is really supposed to be with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Understand? So anyway, anyone that wants to submit it through the PMTA to the FDA within the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, automatically that application will be denied automatically, without questions asked. 29058, the registration and listing requirements and pre-market applications will provide FDA with vital information as to the extent of ENDS use and how many ENDS products consumers are using on a daily basis. See, and that's the whole thing. Like, a vape shop owner is also part of this whole scheme that the FDA is up to. Really up to a scheme here, okay? So it makes it appear so lighthearted and so sweet, but it's not. There's a lot more going on. the FDA, because you got to remember, they're all politicians. They're all politicians. People think that and they're all, most of the people in the FDA are medical doctors yet, and or lawyers even. Mitch Zeller, commissioner, is a he's a lawyer, and yet he pulls all this crap, because it's not so much that he himself will be found, if they went after him, they wouldn't be suing or complaining in a judicial court against Mitch Zeller in his own right. So he doesn't lose his house, he won't lose his car, he won't lose his job unless politics quote unquote deem that as a possibility through the shifting of the ranks. But he doesn't lose his bank account and all that. When they sue Mitch Zeller, so to speak, or the FDA, they sue him in his official capacity, which just goes after the department itself, in and of itself. It goes after the government. It doesn't literally go after Mitch Zeller. But the point is he's a lawyer, then you got medical doctors in the FDA and everything. And yet they're pulling this crap on the side, really. It's not even on the side, it's actually what they're doing. So let's, for instance, the 29038 registration listing requirements. As far as that's concerned, what a vape shop owner has to do by the end of this year, December 31st, 2016, they have to submit every single e-liquid that they have, every single RDA, every single device, every Eagle battery that they have, every drip tip that they have, every battery that they have. Actually, in fact, they have to submit a list of every single thing that's up for sale in their vape shop except screwdrivers and lanyards. Everything else for sale they have to list to be registered with the federal government. Now, most of the time, actually not most of the time, actually all the time, states, in order for small businesses to conduct themselves within states require them to be registered so they can have a business license. Okay, but that's on the state level. It's not until the FDA found a rule that the federal government is actually saying, in a very implied manner, we're going to license you through a registration process by the end of this year, 2016, December 31st, 2016. And if you do not register all your products in your vape shop, then we will probably eventually enforce that and strip you of your license. That's what it's basically saying. It implies that. Because they're required under the FDA final rule, which is a federal statute, that states that they have to comply. And then it also talks about pre-market applications will provide the FDA with vital information as to the extent of ENDS use and how many ENDS products consumers are using on a daily basis. So not only do they find out that kind of information about consumer daily basis use through vape shop, through the vape shops that list all their products in these registration applications, but also anything that is submitted for the pre-market or substantial equivalence or any of that, the FDA will gain knowledge as to what is on the market. I'm sure they know what's on the market. All they have to do is go to FastTech. That pretty much tells you everything that's on the market. I mean, FastTech has like over 10,000 items on the market. But they want it in print, and they want it done their own way. So they'll have a really good idea as far as what to exploit to serve their agenda in the future. What will work, what won't work. They say it in a nice way, like they say how many ENDS product consumers are using on a daily basis, as if they want to know how we're affected by all these products and all this stuff. It's all garbage. No, they want to gain knowledge, so they take that knowledge, just like they did in 2015, and exploit that knowledge through all those public meetings and workshops I was talking about before. Exploit that all that knowledge for their own agenda, which in 2015 they exploited all that knowledge and made the FDA final rule. So, see, I'm going to finish this page. What I'm going to probably wind up doing here is go like, pretty much like one page will be a subpart. So, and I have unfortunately, a lot of pages to do. It depended upon how many, things that I'm going to talk about, but most likely it's going to be each page I'll do a subpart. So there probably might be even more than 5 subparts, because this is very tedious. Like I explained in the teaser, it's going to be very long, very tedious. It's going to take a lot of time. This is no joke. Okay. Anyway, 29038. Long-term risks associated with chronic use of ENDS are unknown, which goes to the perfect point that they don't have substantial scientific data to prove that it's harmful. They have to have the long-term risks are unknown due to the fact that they have no studies to prove that the e-cigarettes right now or in the past are harmful to one's health. Through the application process with the PMTA, SC, and all those other, the 5 pathways to registration, certification, pre-market, SC reports, and the PMTA processes, they will find out about exactly what these long-term risks are. And it probably will take years, and they probably won't even find anything that's really bad for you, and they'll suppress that information. But the moment they find something bad, believe me, it's going to make the front page of the Washington Post. And then in 29039, it states, newly deemed products may be subject to additional regulations. And what that means is, and I spoke about that in the, let me see here, in Part 8 FDA draft guidances. So newly deemed products may be subject to additional regulations, and what they do is the FDA draft guidances is not actually law or regulations, it's suggestions for the industry to follow, but they will also, as according to 29039, they will also amend or modify parts of the FDA final rule as time goes by. So they have that power to do so, which is very scary stuff if you think about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and then have a subpart C to the chapter, to the Part 9 FDA final rule. So I don't, go on too much, and because, like I said, I want to take my time with this because it's very, very, very important, extremely important to do the right way. That is, go through each one, explain it, so we can really get an understanding of what this FDA final rule is saying. And I don't want to rush it, because the moment you start rushing it or you want to get it over with, then you miss some very, very crucial points. So I'd rather take it in blocks, so to speak, of maybe in an hour here, hour there, 45 minutes there, 45 minutes there, or whatever have you. Because I can't see the time on the other side of this particular cell phone that I have. That's how I record my stuff, is on this cell phone. And I can't see the time unless I time it out on the computer, but I typically don't do that. But anyway, and then we'll take it from there, because I'd rather speak to each section in the FDA final rule in a very deliberate manner, in a very focused, put everything in perspective, speak to the facts, and so you can gain knowledge of what's exactly in that FDA final rule and how damaging it is to the e-cigarette market. And so, and understand the overall picture, which I will bring together in all of it in the epilogue. But I don't want to rush it, so I'm going to let this one go here, and then I'll come back with the subpart C. Guys, have a good one. Bye.